This is the third type under which we have seen inventory turnover ratio. This is inventory turnover ratio we have seen, and for that we have written the cost of revenue from operations whole divided by average inventory. This is, I have written in short form, cost of revenue from operations divided by average inventory. First, that is inventory turnover ratio. The second type is trade receivable turnover ratio. Trade receivable. Trade receivable turnover ratio. For this, what is the formula? This we can do from illustration 9. Illustration 9 we can do. Illustration 9. What is given? Credit revenue from operations, that is the trade receivable ratio. Trade receivable ratio is equal to the credit items should be added. Credit revenue from operations. Credit revenue from operations whole divided by trade receivable, that is average trade receivables. Average trade receivables. Listen carefully this. Trade credit revenue from operations. The numerator is credit revenue from operation. Credit revenue from operations is equal to, what is the amount given in illustration 9? The credit revenue from operations of Parini Limited amounted to rupees 9,60,000. It is 9,60,000. This is given straight away. We need not add anything and find the answer. And what about the denominator? Average trade receivables. Average trade receivables. Is equal to opening trade receivable plus closing trade receivable by 2. That is opening trade receivable plus closing trade receivable by 2. In this problem, what is given? its debtors and bills receivable at the end of the accounting period amounted to 1,60,000. Here I should explain you something. This trade receivable is equal to, the formula is credit revenue from operations whole divided by average trade receivables. So, in this what you will have to find. As I said, I should explain you something in it. The trade receivables consist of two items. One is the bills receivable, other one is debtors. This trade receivable consists of one is, as it is given, debtors, and bills receivable. These are the two items which is mentioned commonly as a trade receivable. So, how to find average trade receivable? Listen carefully. Average trade receivable is equal to this average of debtors plus average of bills receivable. That is opening debtor plus closing debtor by 2 plus opening bills receivable plus closing bills receivable by 2. This you will get nowhere this feeding. Listen carefully. Usually what the teachers used to write only the formula and what is there, everything will be omitted. What do you mean by this trade receivable, debtors and bills receivable? When you find the average of trade receivable, you should find the average of debtors and average of bills receivable. What is average of debtors? Opening debtors plus closing debtor by 2. Likewise, opening bills receivable plus closing bills receivable by 2. This is the actual meaning of average trade receivable. But what I have written here, see, the opening trade receivable plus closing trade receivable. In the debtor, what is given? Debtors and bills receivable at the end of the accounting period. Debtor is at the end of the accounting period and bills receivable is at the end of the accounting period. That is, closing debtor and closing bills receivable are given. So, if we take these two, should we divide those two numbers, add and divide it by 2? No. That is why you can find in the illustration also, the answer is not divided by 2. But for that, I don't think closing trade receivable are taken instead. So it should be taken like that, it should be taken like that, it is given. But why it is? No reason is given. The reason is this. Only if opening debtor and closing debtor are given, you can add and divide it by 2. But only the closing debtor, that is debtor at the end is given. வருஷ கடைசியில் இருக்கிறது மட்டும்தான் கொடுத்துருக்காங்க. பிகினிங்லேயும் எண்டில் இருக்கிறது ரெண்டையும் ஆட் பண்ணி 2 ஆல் டிவைட் பண்ணலாம். But only this is given. So you will not divide it by 2. Regarding the bills receivable also, if opening bills receivable and closing bills receivable are given, you can add and divide it by 2. But here only the closing bills receivable is given, no opening bills receivable, and therefore there is no question of finding the average. Why? To find the average, you need at least 2 items. So add 2 divided by 2. If there are 3 items, add all the 3 divided by 3. If there are 4 items, add all the 4 and divide it by 4. So we should do like that. Here only 1 item is given. There is no need of finding the average for it. You should take them into consideration as it is. So for this, what you should write, this is equal to closing debtors plus closing bills receivable. That's all. No question of dividing it by 2. This is equal to closing debtors amount is 1 lakh and the closing bills receivable 60,000. So 1 lakh plus 60,000, that is equal to 1,60,000. Now we have found out the answer for both numerator and the denominator. This is equal to credit revenue, that is 9,60,000 whole divided by 1,60,000. This is equal to 6 times. 6 times. So this is the formula for this. You should understand it. Here the ratio is a trade receivable ratio. Ratio. When these are all credit transactions, the numerator itself indicates credit revenue. எப்போ வாங்குவாங்க? Only when there are debtors. Only when there are debtors. நம்மள்ட்ட இந்த கடன் வாங்கணும் இருந்தாதான் கடனாளின்னு சொல்லுவாங்க in Tamil. Only if we have lent the amount, if the business has lent amount, then we can say there are some debtors. So what is the next question? Debt collection period. So when there are debtors, we should collect the debts. That is, kadanalla collect pananum. Debt collection period. Debt collection period is equal to number of months in a year. If it is the last sum also like that. If it is for months, number of months in a year. Whole divided by the ratio as usual. That is a trade receivable turnover ratio. Trade receivable turnover ratio. Trade receivable turnover ratio. Here also I have written trade receivable turnover I missed. So you write turnover ratio. So number of months in a year 12 and the trade receivable turnover ratio is 6. 12 by 6 is equal to 2 months. As it is in the previous problem. If the debt collection period is in days, then number of days in a year by trade receivable turnover ratio. Days means here 365 by 6 you will write. So what is the speciality in this problem? The speciality is when it is compared with the other one, inventory turnover ratio, it is easier because one thing, the credit revenue from operations is given straight away, no problem. You can write as it is given in the problem. Then second one is average trade receivables. The formula given in the book is opening trade receivable plus closing trade receivable by 2. But when the amount is given, there is no by 2. Why? Formula பார்த்தீங்கன்னா opening trade receivable plus closing trade receivable by 2 அப்படின்னு சொல்றாங்க. ஆனா இங்க ஆன்சர் எடுத்து நம்பர் எழுதும்போது it is not divided by 2. Why it is? You should know that. Since it is given in the book, you should not follow blindly. You should know why it is. Okay, trade receivables consist of debtors and bills receivable. These are the two items. So once you talk about the average trade receivable, you should talk about the average debtors and the average bills receivable. What do you mean by average debtors? Average debtors means opening debtors plus closing debtors by 2. Then regarding the bills receivable, opening bills receivable plus closing bills receivable by 2. This is the formula. But in this problem, no opening debtor given, no opening bills receivable given. So there is the question of finding the average. No question of finding average. Only we to find the average, we should have 2 information regarding the same item. We should have 2 informations regarding the same item. So debtors and both the things should be given. If only one is given, we cannot find the average. So closing debtor, that is taken as it is. Regarding the bills receivable, if opening bills receivable, that is bills receivable in the beginning of the year, bills receivable at the end of the year are given, we can add and divide it by 2 to find the average. Here only the bills receivable at the end, that is closing bills receivable is given, and therefore no question of finding the average. So closing debtor and the closing bills receivable are taken here. The reason you should know. ஏன் 2 ஆல டிவைட் பண்ணங்கிறதுக்கு காரணம் தெரிஞ்சிருக்கணும் உங்களுக்கு இப்போ. Because no opening and closing debtors are given. If both are given, you can add and divide it by 2. If both closing and opening bills receivables are given, you can add and find the average. But here only one debtor, one bills receivable is given, therefore you can add and write. Okay, then average trade receivables. Then we have written, we have added and written. So the numerator 9,60,000, denominator 1,50,000. So 4 zeros cancel, 96 by 16, 6 times. Therefore this is the ratio. That is trade receivable turnover ratio. Good. The second, the third part of the question is debt collection period. See, the name itself indicates a trade receivable, debtor, bills receivable. These are all appearing in credit transactions. Who is a debtor? The person one who have enjoyed the benefit from us. நாம யாருக்கெல்லாம் கடன் கொடுத்துருக்கோமோ, நம்ம பெனிஃபிட்டை அப்டைன் பண்ணியிருக்காங்களோ அவங்க தான் டெட்டார். ஸோ நம்ம கடன் கொடுத்துருக்குறோம். Then what we must do? We should make the collection from those debtors. So we need some period for it. In how many months it should be collected? For that, debt collection period is asked. What it is? Number of months in a year by trade receivable turnover ratio. If it is for days, debt collection period is in terms of days. Number of days in a year divided by trade receivable turnover ratio. Here months, therefore 12 months in a year by ratio in this problem is 6. Therefore 12 by 6 equal to 2 months. Okay? Right. Now 9. In it, the credit revenue from operations of Wherever Limited amounted to 10 lakhs. Its debtors and bills receivable at the end of the accounting period. At the end of the accounting period amounted to 1,10,000, 1,40,000 respectively. Calculate trade receivable turnover ratio. Trade receivable turnover ratio. Turnover ratio. This we should find. And for this we should find both numerator and the denominator. What is the trade receivable turnover ratio? Credit revenue from operations by average trade receivable. Therefore, for the numerator, credit revenue from operations is equal to, it is given straight away. That is the credit revenue from operations 10 lakhs. It is given as 10 lakhs. And average trade receivables we should find. I have made the explanation now. What do you mean by trade receivable? Trade receivable consists of debtors and the bills receivable. So average trade receivable in the sense, this regarding the debtor, opening debtor plus closing debtor by 2, but only the debtor at the end of the year, that is closing debtor is given, therefore we need not divide it by 2, therefore closing debtor given. Then regarding the bills receivable, to find the average bills receivable, what we must do? We should add the opening bills receivable with the closing bills receivable and divide it by 2. But in this problem, the bills receivable at the end is only given, not the opening given, beginning given. Therefore, we need not divide it by 2. And therefore, we should take the closing debtor at the end of the year and the closing bills receivable at the end of the year. That is, and only those 2 items we should take. We need not divide it. It is an important idea. We need not divide it. So what is that? We debtors 1,10,000 plus closing, that is bills receivable at the end of the year 1,40,000, which is equal to the totally it is 2,50,000. So we have found out the values of numerator value 10 lakhs, denominator value 2,50,000. So you can simplify 4 zeros, cancel 100 by 25, it is 4. You should write times in answer. Okay, 4 times. Here the debt collection period in months only is asked, the same formula. If it is in days, number of days in a year divided by this trade receivable turnover ratio. Here it is months, therefore 12 months, 12 by 4 times 12 by 4, which is equal to 3 times. So, this model problems, and therefore we have seen under turnover ratios there are 2 types. One is inventory turnover ratio, other one is the trade receivable turnover ratio. And these are the 2 types we have seen so far. And under this, what is your assignment you must do today? You know, assignment illustrations 1 to 9. Illustration 1 to 9 is the assignment given to you, what you must do, and bring or send those assignments to school. And before that, what we have seen so far regarding the ratio. There are 4 types of ratio. Other one is we are going to see in the third type itself. There are 2 more types. We will see it in the coming classes. And you should remember, we have completed 2 ratios. One is the liquidity ratio, under which what we have seen under liquidity ratios. Do you remember them? Current ratio, and the second type, quick ratio. These are the 2 ratios. Current ratio is equal to current assets by current liabilities. Quick ratio is equal to quick assets by current liabilities. And regarding this second one, the second one is, what type do you remember? The second type, we have seen under it debt equity ratio, proprietary ratio, gearing ratio, and all those things. 3 we have seen. What you have done? Solvency, long-term solvency ratio. That is the second type. Under which we have seen what the first one? Debt equity ratio. Second one we have seen, after debt equity ratio, we have seen proprietary ratio. Third one we have seen the gearing ratio and capital gearing ratio. These are the 3 types. So in the first model 2 types, second model 3 types, 5 we have seen already. And regarding the third model, turnover ratios, inventory turnover ratio and trade receivable ratio, we have seen so far. And there are 2 more items, what trade payable ratio, and the last one, fixed asset turnover ratio. 2 more ratios are yet to be seen under this third ratio. Okay, we will continue with the next class.